keeping things going.
Yeah, we're almost, I think, at a steady spot here. Ange, maybe you'll let us know kind of when things seem to kind of stable out.
I think we have a critical mass. We can go
We
ahead.
have a critical mass. All right, we're going to get started then. So welcome, everybody. I don't know how many of you heard Bill just now say that despite it being summer, we are really delighted that you're able to join us. And huge kudos to Angela for taking us to the beach. For those of us who really wish we were there instead of on this call, but what can you do, right? So it's just that little bit of a glimpse into that other world that seems to have totally disappeared for many of us. And as you can imagine, this is not going to be the end of it, because if we do and when we do have this election called, if it is as soon as we think, we're all going to be very busy over the next couple months. So welcome everybody to what I really do mean is sorry to interrupt our summer holidays webinar series, but really delighted to see so many people coming forth. We've got two that are going on right now from, before we think might be the election call, and that is to come back to aligning on the rare drug strategy, the PMPRB and the federal election. And the next one, which will really focus on what do we want as a rare disease community to make sure that our political parties, our politicians, policymakers are hearing. So that will be next week at this same time. Even more relaxing, lovely. Okay, we're in good shape at this point. So three big issues, I think. I'm really welcome Bill Dempster, who will probably do a lot of the moderation with me on this one. But we felt that there were three big issues that really prompted our calling these two sessions right now. One is we had heard that there was going to be the release of Health Canada's report on the expensive drugs for rare diseases strategy consultation, the What We Heard report. It isn't out yet. We hear again that it is imminent and that there's just some fine tuning they're doing on it. So hopefully it will be out in the next few days and we can actually have a discussion around it. But we thought we might use the time also to summarize what it is that we heard and what you collectively contributed over these past few months, starting from last September. So where are we now? What do we think we need to kind of solidify around as we're moving forward? And how might that fit into what Health Canada or what federal government is going to say in terms of what they heard and what that suggests? The second issue that we will touch on just lightly here, but it is really important. Many of you know we had another 6 months hiatus on the implementation of the new regulations from PMPRB. Honestly, gosh, I call this whack-a-mole because the minute they did that, they turned around and say, oh no, by the way, we've got new sets of, we've got some new changes that we'd like to bring in right away on restricting or prescription drug prices on grandfather drugs. So honestly, it really does make you wonder kind of what is the pharmaceutical strategy in this country? Are we really interested in terms of ensuring we've got, sustainable, affordable, accessible drugs for patients? Or are we just really playing a whack-a-mole in terms of drug pricing? And if that's the only thing, then I think we're really going to have to, kind of take a, I think we are in bigger trouble than we might have anticipated. So Kim says, giving with one hand and taking with another. It's absolutely that. I just really do think of it. First thing I saw when I said, I thought about our whack-a-mole game. So anyway, here we are playing whack-a-mole again. And of course, the fact is that we do have a federal election coming up. What we want to do is make sure that we put out as much as possible so that we can be aligned and that we can align the political parties and the candidates to support rare diseases and the rare drug strategy. And of course, we do have, as you all know, $500 million that has been committed. And we want to make sure that that commitment not only stays strong, but it does come into play, in 2022. And that's one of our big worries and why we're coming together. We know 2019, they announced in the federal budget that we were going to be having this $500 million a year. And then an election was called. Everything went into shutdown. And then even a year after the election, we, kept hearing, well, the health minister isn't there yet. We haven't got a critical mass yet. We're just coming up to speed on issues. And then we had COVID, and it was like, okay, we'll wait till we get COVID a little bit addressed, and everything went into a stall, which is why we last year decided we needed to start the consultations. Because if we waited for the government to believe that it is a good time to do this, then we were certainly not going to be in place in 2022. And sadly, here we are in 2021 at exactly that same point. So we believe, again, it will be up to the community to really push this so that we don't have a year and a half hiatus while the government pulls itself together, whatever government it is, to, even if there is that strong commitment to do it, to get around to doing it. We can't afford to wait till they get around to it. It's too important to us. So I may stop there. This is just to just provide that bit of context. I think I just talked about it as well, been reaffirmed several times. We just need to make sure that, as we say, the major parties, the Liberals, the Conservatives, certainly the NDP as well, would be able to acknowledge the fact that we need this going forward. And that will be part of what we hope will be an aligned, coordinated ask from the rare community. Next. Not going to dwell on this. Those of you who've been with us, and I think many of you have been, know that we're talking about a rare disease drug strategy, but we're talking about it within the context of a rare disease strategy. And we cannot emphasize enough that we cannot just have drugs, and we're not just looking at, making drugs available. It is not going to work for us if it doesn't, if it's not embedded in an overall strategy that includes diagnosis, that includes having centers of excellence, that includes having a strong supportive community, and certainly an ability to get early sustainable access as these drugs are becoming available, and certainly has to have a strong research component with it that is not only going to be developing drugs, but ensuring we're collecting the information to make the best use of those therapies. So just put that on there. And then I won't go through these 12 steps because we'll come back to them a bit later. When we submitted, based on all the consultations we had with everybody that was part of our, those many months of consultations, we came back and said, look, we've got a 12 steps to a national rare disease framework. We really feel that this can be done without necessarily waiting until the federal government is fully ready. We can start some of this now, and that's part of this discussion. So we'll come back to many of these. And then propose that as part of the implementation, I said pre-election activities. Obviously, we got plunged into the election pretty quickly, but we will be rolling out these work streams. As I said, between now and the election, and certainly after the election, we have several work streams that we know need to be taking place, again, so we don't lose momentum. So we're not waiting for the governments to be able to say, okay, we're ready, and we will begin to address your issues. And I won't go into these in detail again, but just be aware that we're going to be calling upon you to help us in terms of filling out some of these work streams, so that we've got our pillars in place to be able to support, access to a rare disease strategy. And we're pleased to see actually other players coming in now to actually take on some of these tasks as well. Real world evidence, we're going to be seeing stuff coming out of CHR, out of Canada. We've got the value-based pricing. We're very excited in terms of what the opportunities might be in terms of looking at new models in terms of pricing that are not, embedded in the PMPRB, but are really looking at what we're going to do to assure that, what we're actually being able to talk about in terms of a value-based pricing. Okay, next, is that it? All right, I'm going to stop there and pass it over to Bill so he can talk to us a little bit about what the political situation is before we bring in the rest of the panel.
Thanks so much, Durhan, and thanks everyone. You'll see I put in the chat box and panel encouraging folks to put in their questions and comments there. And Durhan, depending on how this goes, it is a town hall style toward the end, so we may actually call on you to jump in verbally and wave properly when we see you. But we do have an incredible panel lined up. So Durhan walked through all of the things that CORD has been advocating for and leading on for well over 10 years, 15 years. We've made incredible progress as a rare disease community in bringing rare to the top of many political agendas across the country. But the real challenge, and this is what we're hoping that the panel is going to help us work through. I'm looking at Peter in particular, because if anyone can bring things down to 3 words, Peter, it's you. How do we take some of these, value-based healthcare, but make that resonate in an electoral setting when someone's knocking at your door? So please keep that in mind, or you're eating a spaghetti lunch under a church or something like that with your local MP, as we all like to do, and they certainly like to do. But just to bring it back out to the political situation writ large, it's almost for sure we're going to have a summer election call. By this time in August, there may be lawn signs popping up across the country. Despite what the Prime Minister says, the campaign teams are ready to go. They're nominating candidates for all of the parties across the country. Before the House broke in the summer, many exiting MPs that are not running again gave their farewell speeches. We heard that lawn signs have actually been ordered. In fact, there's a shortage of the special resin that they use in the lawn signs, an MP told me last week. And also, probably most importantly, in general, the COVID trends are heading in the right direction, as many of us have experienced in terms of being able to get out and about. That's the one question mark. If things start to go sideways, the election might be held off. But really, this is the sweet spot for the Liberals to go. The election timing, we're looking at the call the week of August 16th or 23rd, and we're starting to circle dates in late September and early October for the actual vote. And it's a very complex calculus to figure out where each of the parties are going to be trying to make inroads. The Liberals want to win some more seats in British Columbia and Ontario and hold on to what they have in Quebec. The NDP and Jagmeet Singh are seeing support rising. That could split the left and actually help the Conservatives a bit, but hurt the Liberals more, and it might actually leave them in an even worse minority position than they are now. And the Conservatives and its leader, Erin O'Toole, have higher negatives than other parties at the same time, and that means that more Canadians would not vote for them at all than for the NDP as a second choice or the Liberals as a second choice. Now, that said, they haven't really been in the spotlight that much. So things will change. Campaigns do matter. What is for sure is this electoral map will probably change colors to some extent. The Liberals only need 15 more seats for that majority. They have 155, they need 170, and that's what they're aiming for. Next slide, please. So the election issues and the positions that could be relevant that are coming out of the Liberals, Conservatives, the Bloc, the NDP, and the Greens, if they manage to actually have a campaign, and that's an open question. The Liberals, we know they're going to have national pharmacare in their platform. They'll talk about their steps towards a Canada Drug Agency, and we expect that they will continue and cite their ongoing commitment to rare disease drug strategy, and that's the $500 million a year starting in 2022. The Conservatives in 2019, they included as well half a billion dollars per year, but they said let the provinces actually use that in the best way that they think that they should for helping rare disease patients in their provinces. And more recently, not in the only way that you can read through this is they said that they will stop fighting with the pharmaceutical industry, but that actually means reform the PMPRB and its approaches. The Bloc Québécois are really focused on the Canada Health Transfer and getting more money from the federal government to the Quebec government so that it can actually bolster its health system. And I think that actually aligns with a lot of the other premiers across the country. It's not just the Bloc Québécois that's asking for that from Ottawa. The NDP, they have a pretty comprehensive campaign platform already online, and they're talking about a new deal that includes pharmacare. And then finally, the Greens in 2019, they wanted to start with a basic formulary pharmacare. So they didn't have anything specifically to rare, but let's make sure that they all do this time around. Next slide, please. So what will the ballot box issue be? So our day-to-day is in health and all of that is thinking, okay, it's got to be something on better access to medicines, better access to treatments, et cetera. But the actual ballot box issue, what people will vote on in an election, is probably not going to be that, with some exceptions. It's going to be, you know, did the government respond to the COVID pandemic well? Should they be rewarded for their pandemic response? You know, will I have a job next year? I'm worried about the future, given that we've got over $1 trillion in debt now and hundreds of billions of dollars in deficit that are being promised. You know, I can't afford my housing. It's too expensive in my city. Gas is too expensive. Food, pharmacare, and childcare. That's that affordability bucket, and I think that does resonate at the door. And maybe we want to keep an eye on that one. And then the environment is a big issue. I should have actually included healthcare in that, but we maybe could put that under affordability. Either way, what I will say is that in 2006, when the Conservatives came to power, was that 2005 or 2000? I think it was 2006. Harper said wait times. That was his number one thing on the health front, and expect something like that from the parties again. Health will be a major campaign platform. Nanos and CTV are looking at the most important policy issue that will influence the vote. They gave this list. If you give people like no list and you say, what's your most important issue? They say COVID still. But if you give them a list and the policy issue that will influence the vote, the economy came out first, then the environment, the deficit, healthcare, and then it was interesting, the fifth was the pandemic, and a few others below that. Next slide, please. So our trick, and you've already seen this, is how to translate CORD's key asks, which Durhan flipped through in terms of all of the 12 things we want them to jumpstart with. Implement Canada's rare disease strategy with these 5 more, like relatively easy things. They're very complicated, but there's only 5 of them, and that's what everyone can do. What can CORD propose for the federal election? And I want to put something in the parking lot here. The Finance Committee of the House of Commons actually has an open consultation now for budget 2022. So that's something that CORD will be working on as a response to that. It's due on August 7th. So even before the election, that's one place that we can actually, capture some of the outcomes of this webinar. Next slide, please. The other key federal issues in an update, as Durhan noted, we're waiting for the What We Heard report from Health Canada. And then if Parliament continues to sit, then we may see a few more meetings happen. Just a really quick update on the PMPRB. The changes were delayed a third 6-month period in the context of the COVID pandemic. So now they'll come into force on January 1st, 2022. So you'll recall at a previous webinar we did, after the second delay, the PMPRB launched a communications and advocacy strategy that actually circled CORD among other patient groups as spreading disinformation, and there's that is available online. They proposed reduced compliance timelines, so they wanted to go faster with the some of the enforcement of the price controls, and they reversed it only a couple weeks later. So, after this recent delay, we would have thought that would have been addressed, especially on the compliance timelines. But no, they've now proposed adding new price reductions using the old basket of countries, but new ways to look at them and calculate them. And they're speeding the timelines for enforcement again. And the consultation on that is open until August 15th. The back of the envelope calculations. Well, first of all, the spaghetti graph you see down there in terms of how things will be tested and reduced in terms of price is going to get more complicated. That's number one. But the back of the envelope math is suggesting that for some products, it's going to be 10, 15, or 20% more on the top line list price for products that are already on the market and we need right now. So we can come back to that in terms of the open town hall if anyone has any specific questions. That will need further unpacking for sure. Next slide, please. So CORD's midsummer super panel and town hall. Our panel include some of the superstars from the rare diseases community. Peter Brenders is General Manager of BioGene Canada, but many of you know him from his time heading Biotech Canada, his time heading Genzyme in Canada. And congratulations, Peter, in your new role. We've already had you out for one CORD webinar as BioGene, so this is great to have you here. We've got Alexandra Chambers, Manager of National Oncology Policy with Novartis Pharmaceuticals. And many of us know Alex from her long time with the Pan-Canadian Oncology Drug Review and with CADIS. And just Alex, you're very thoughtful, analytical and review of rare disease strategy since coming to Novartis, but also before, I think is going to be really relevant and helpful for this discussion. So thank you. Kathy Evanochko with Tuberous Sclerosis Canada is going to bring the patient voice and longtime board member with CORD as well. Dr. Angela Genge with the Neuro at McGill is the Director of Clinical Research Unit at the Montreal Neurological Institute, or as everyone refers to it as the Neuro. Welcome back. We've got Fred Horn, former Alberta Minister of Health and also a Senior Advisor to 360 Public Affairs. Thank you, Fred, for joining us. And Dr. Leanne Ward, Medical Director of the Pediatric Bone Health Clinic and Research Programs at CHIO, just down the street from where I am right now in Ottawa too. So let's open it up. There are three questions that that Durhan wanted to sort of put out to kick it off. So and I'll go through them now immediately so you can start thinking about it. But we're going to start with, what are the selling points? Like what is different or important about rare that people should care about at the electoral level and getting ready for this? Like why should they care when they knock on the door and they meet you, or they're asking you for a donation or to put that lawn sign up? Two, how do our needs or our asks or questions fit into the different election platforms for the parties? And third, and I'm already seeing some great chatter in the box here, how do we roll these insights up? And so Durhan's going to come back on, and not just, we'll both monitor the chat. And thank you, Michael, for the date correction on the pre-budget submissions. They're due Friday, August 6th, so not on the 7th. So thank you for that. So why don't we start with Peter? Peter, what are the selling points? Like, why care about rare? We do. Why should they?
Great question, Bill. And you think about how does it become retail? And you think of the work that Durhan and CORD and all the patient groups have been doing for the last 15, 20 years, trying to get it on the radar. Because I always think about it's like probably coming up to the 40th anniversary of the U.S. Orphan Drug Act. It's amazing. And then Canada's still talking, thinking about it. And it's funny, like, why don't we act? And is it because the political spectrum doesn't see the value in any? There's no retail, there's no votes in actually acting, which also is to your point, Bill. What's our three words there? It's like, is it time for action, not talk? Like, can we just pull the trigger for once? But I do wonder, and maybe you'd have more insight, Bill, in terms of what are the polls been saying. I can't but help feel that the average Canadian is thinking more about life sciences coming out of the pandemic, is thinking more about sort of medical treatments and options. And the story of rare is not so rare. Durhan, you've often said there's thousands of rare diseases that are out there. It's caring for those that are being ignored, right? It's caring for those that have been passed over. We have a health system for some, but not for all. So how do we keep our message simple? Is that looking after rare is looking after all Canadians. It's no longer a forgotten population. And if we can play on sort of, we've come out of it's been the life sciences industry. It's been vaccines that's got us out of the pandemic. And let's remind everyone, the only reason they'll be going door to door is because of vaccines. is clear. You're not walking door to door if you don't have vaccines. It just not. You're going to be locked down again. And so if we can connect the people in terms of that life sciences brought our life back to normal as best you can for those that can, and that we have a great unmet need for the rare space. There is a forgotten population where life sciences can solve, and that everyone's been given lip service for the last number of years. It's time for action, not talk.
Yeah, and then one of the tricks there, well, first of all, in the polls, it's looking very much like a liberal majority is in the offing. There, but at least a 50% chance of a liberal majority, and I think a 2 to 5% chance of a conservative minority. So, but that's the polls today. That can change, right? Winston Churchill, the conservatives in England lost after they had won World War II. So things can change really quickly, but that's what the polls are saying now. And it's kind of funny, you said less talk, more action. There's a new NDP campaign that says Trudeau talks, the NDP, does or delivers. That's what he said, the NDP delivers. So we do need to get it down to that sort of nub, and maybe by the end of this webinar, we will. The last thing I'll say, and this is a trick for the innovators or life sciences organizations in the sector here. Innovation's an overused term. Life sciences, people don't know what that means. People are worried that that's like our grade 11 biology class, and they kind of get shivers when they think about life sciences. Like, what are you going to do to me? So translating that into, the only thing that got people back to going out to brunch or meeting up with old friends or seeing your relatives across the country are vaccines. That's a trick. I just don't know if life sciences is the
so to your point on that one then, Bill, is just a question, like, call it out. It's pharma. Pharma's got us back to work. Like let's talk about it out there and put it in the face. But I hear you. It's again, you got to figure out what the language is. You got to simple it down. But my other counsel or suggestion is, I think we need to ask for fewer things. If we give a list, everyone glosses over. It's like, can we come down to one thing? What's the one thing we'd really, really, really want? And is it just deploy the 500 million? Is that we can build all the other stuff around it, but like, what's the one thing? And I don't know, sure what, again, I think that's the conversation. What is the one thing we'd ask for?
Excellent. Maybe I'll turn over to, thanks, Peter. Alex, why should people care about rare?
Yeah, no, thanks for the question, and thanks for the invitation today. And I think I agree with what Peter was just saying, and looking what can we get out of the pandemic. And people are so much more aware of regulatory approvals and even just how the system works at this time than they've ever been. And so I think that's one piece. I think the other piece is that, some work that, I've been doing with Durhan and Leanne recently is we've been able to demonstrate that Canada's falling behind in terms of its access to drugs for rare diseases compared to other countries. And I think, as Canadians, if they see that they don't have comparable access to, countries in Europe and the United States, I think that does raise questions as to why are we falling behind, and it's actually quite clear that we are, and I think this rare disease strategy that Health Canada is putting forward, we really need to find a way to sort of hold their feet to the fire here and make sure that once the strategy is implemented, that we actually do see a change and that there is that increase in access. But I think at this point, we can show that we actually don't have comparable access.
And maybe, Alex, one quick follow-up. Do you have a good URL or link to some new data on that by any chance? Are you aware of any interesting things that are coming forward on that one?
So I will say we've got a manuscript. We've submitted it for publication. So hopefully within the next month or two, we should have something that we can share in it, and it's concrete data in terms of the drugs that are not just coming through Health Canada, but that are publicly funded in each of the provinces.
Excellent, thank you. So TBC on that URL, but we'll you know, what I guess one of the takeaways is once we get our, you know, election kits, we'll start to add to it in terms of the references. And the key one, back to Peter's point, what's the one reason everyone knows about cancer? 1 in 2 Canadians are going to get cancer. 1 in 4 Canadians are going to die from it. What's our like stat that is sticky like that? And that's been a big challenge. I don't think Dr. Genge is on the line, if I'm not mistaken. I don't see her yet. Durhan, do you?
That's a good point. Maybe, if you don't mind, if we can, I know she accepted, and we, Ange, can you just tweak her to see if in fact she is coming on, because it'd be great to have her on to be able to speak to some of this as well. But I don't. Hello?
Yeah, I'll reach out to her.
Yeah, if you don't mind doing that, so we can make sure. But maybe we can pivot over a little bit to Kathy then. And I think it is important though, and I will interject to say, it's not just about access. And I think that's kind of what we've all been talking about, right? If our only barometer on whether this $500 million is well spent is whether or not we're able to have, you know, more drugs on a formulary, we lose. That is not it. And I think that's what the whole rare disease drug strategy is about, but also the rare disease strategy. And I think that's why we are emphasizing again, you know, the pillars are very important in terms of making sure we do the, you know, the testing, and that we are able to make sure it gets to the right people. And so very keen to kind of make sure that, you know, we're not just at the same as the PMPRB, we're not just beating up on prices. We do need to make sure that we've got, you know, value-based pricing, and we're not just kind of flagging access, you know, because I mean, anybody can hand out drugs. That's not it.
Yeah.
But it is an important thing. It's not to say we don't want access and we don't want timely access, but it's not our only, you know, barometer there.
So you want to, let's go to Kathy, and then we'll go to Fred. I don't see Leanne on the line yet.
Leanne is actually in clinic, so she was going to try to join us if she could. So, you know, we kind of caught her trying to get in and out of clinic, unfortunately.
Okay. Yeah. So Kathy, your 2 cents that are worth much more than 2 cents. What do you think?
I would like to say, kind of agree with Durhan and everyone else about focusing on something around the rare disease strategy. We've been working and plugging this so very long, and for us to not have gotten it through, and a couple of times the reason is because of a new election. So it's been ongoing, but I think from the patient voice perspective, oftentimes the patient voice is considered to be emotional, not factual. And it's certainly not political. So I think what I get as I counsel a lot of patients newly diagnosed, et cetera, is the surprise that patients have that when somebody in Ontario could get a treatment, but in Alberta they cannot, or somebody in USA can get it, but in Canada cannot. So I think there's such a big element of surprise. So I think awareness has been heightened around the safety of the vaccines, for example. That's been ongoing conversation. I think that was helpful to the situation we're in. But I would say that the patient groups up till now have been fragmented. There's so many rare diseases. So they fragment, they get to learn their disease, they deal with people internationally, but they don't have the knowledge and experience to advocate and turn it into the political thing that the government makes it and that the processes are designed around. So I think that makes it really difficult for patients trying to they want to bring forth their voice, but they don't have the training and they don't have the knowledge around the political side of it. So I would say thank you, CORD, for trying to build some patient experts and training us and leading on this charge. But I think I'm quite used to being dismissed as being emotional or I don't know enough about the political side of it.
So just building on that, maybe, and this is going back to, Peter and Alex's input, like, did you know? And then it's almost Socratic, and you're engaging them on something that they didn't know before, and that's something we can probably build in. It works well in social media too to engage people on that. So, Fred, I mean, you've actually gone door to door yourself, and what are your thoughts about what might have? I mean, now sitting on this side of the door, what can, but also being a real part of the rare disease community for the last long while, what do you think is, is the selling point that we can use?
Well, thanks, Bill and Durhan, for inviting me. I mean, I think I agree with the need to kind of simplify the message, and ideally down to one overarching message that puts everyone in a position then to invite a more detailed conversation to the candidates who are interested in doing that. And there will be some, it won't be all of them. So I say that as number one. And I mean, as another take really on some of the things that have been said already, I think a potential key message is that, rare is no longer rare. Rare is mainstream. It's mainstream, a mainstream healthcare issue in terms of the number of Canadians that are affected. It's a mainstream issue in terms of the future and emerging therapies, personalized medicine. And people don't have to watch too much American television and CNN, for example, in particular, to get a really good sense of what's out there. They may not know whether or not it's available in Canada, but I think the public is coming to a greater understanding that, all diseases, particularly something like cancer, that the future of effective therapies and cures is going to come down to, the very same things that are studied in the development of a drug for a rare disease. So your genetic makeup, biomarkers that might exist, and so forth. So rare is mainstream, I think, is potentially something to talk about. The other point I'd make is to remember that, when you are talking to candidates, you're not only trying to promote and support and influence the party that you think may form government, you're also educating the opposition. So if you're talking to an NDP candidate, and this is really about linkages, I mean, I've for a long time, I've deliberately tried to make a link between the need for a rare disease strategy and the desire for national pharmacare, right? If you could successfully implement a rare disease strategy for Canadians, you would have the foundation for everything you would need for a national pharmacare program. You'd have registries, you'd have data, you'd have real world evidence, all of those things that we've all talked about as part of a rare disease strategy. If you're talking to a conservative candidate, you might want to try to make the link to the economy. And you could talk about, as Peter said, you could talk about pharma, you could talk about medical research and the supply chain, and the potential for rare disease, given that it's that type of work that's driving the discovery of emerging therapies and making them available. You could talk about those sectors. The other thing you could talk to all parties, I think, about is the fact that we're not starting from scratch here. There is a draft rare disease strategy for Canada that's well understood. There have been draft regulatory frameworks for orphan drugs that have been developed by Health Canada. And most recently, we have this, this commitment around the money, but also the strategy. So it's the follow through and calling out. I think it's fair to call out the expectation that the current government will follow through on its commitment. And I think you can get opposition candidates talking about the lack of follow through, as it may be perceived, at the door as well. So all of these things are mainstream, whether we're talking about drug coverage or other parts of the healthcare system that are neglected. Seniors care is very high on the radar. If you were to break down that healthcare priority, mental health, you can talk about rare in the same way. It doesn't have to be approached meekly as it's a peripheral issue. Rare is mainstream. That would be my message.
Can I ask a question on this? Because I love Fred's thing there. Rare is mainstream, and so I was thinking is rare is Main Street. That's out there. And so the question I'd ask Durhan on that one, and I saw Jerry McCarron put a note up there, it's like 1 in 12. I mean, is there a message to be said that everyone probably knows someone with a rare disease? I mean, can we make it that common? It's that folks would understand and such that a candidate would appreciate that, hey, actually why voters would care about their people they know that are being neglected.
Durhan, you're on mute.
There are so many ways we can whip this, right? Because I think what everybody has said really kind of is helping us to really formulate that kind of a cohesive message. You know, what we say in the rare disease international community, of course, is that rare is not so rare, I think, as we all agree. But also increasingly, every disease is going to become a rare disease. And I think as Fred and Peter, you know well, and Alex, you know, the things that we're championing in terms of diagnosis and treatment for rare diseases are actually the strategies for diagnosis and treatment of all diseases. So we're seeing that increasingly. Genetic variations, genomic, types that are going to be coming forth, the strategies that we have. The other thing that's important, I'll throw this out there and I'll leave it to other people to craft it, is that quite frankly, with the advances in technology, most rare diseases are going to be actually diagnosable. I mean, this is important to know. We can diagnose these diseases, even ultra rare diseases. And as importantly, many of these are actually going to become not only treatable, but curable. I mean, this is huge. And we're working with the WHO and essential medicines, right? I mean, Alex, you know this well. We're coming more and more, I mean, as others, right? These are, and they're going to start coming faster, not just gene therapies, but certainly these are the therapies. So I think we need to put that all into big context, right? Is that, yes, you know, rare diseases are not so rare. Rare diseases are still extremely lethal. We started off our series by saying 1 in every 18 minutes, somebody dies of a rare disease in Canada. And I got some pushback that said, really, where's your data? And we actually could provide the data that actually does substantiate. I mean, given the number of rare diseases, given the challenges in diagnosing them, given the fact that many treatments, the other stats I like to put out there is only 10%, 5% of diseases actually have a treatment, maybe up to 7%. Only 10% of those who are eligible for that treatment actually ever get access to the treatment, even in developed countries. I mean, what a tragedy. We invest all this money in research and development. We invest all this money in terms of bringing these drugs there. And guess what? We keep it away from 90% of the people who might benefit from it. And all those reasons are all the kinds of crazy bureaucratic reasons. And as Alex can tell us, you know, it's even worse in Canada. If it's 90% in the rest of the world, you know, we can imagine why it's so challenging here. So, I mean, I think, I don't know where the exact message is in there, but to me it is, as Fred says, we're also increasingly with the WHO, rare diseases is a public health issue. You know, you think about it, it affects the public. It's like COVID almost. It's like cancer. It's a public health issue. But the good news is that we can diagnose many of them now, and we're getting more and more of those. We're going to be able to treat more and more of them, and we're actually going to be able to cure some of them. Good God, you know, what more do we want? You know, and Canada can make up its mind. You know, as Alex says, we can either be in the forefront, we can do that, or we can kind of watch the rest of the world do it, and we can, you know, kind of be left in the dust. And I think that's our challenge.
Yeah, and I see Maureen's got her hand up just before we turn to, and Maureen's got her video on, which is great. Thank you. And I want to give a quick shout out to, I think I saw Gail Latera too on the line, because it's, I remember, and I don't want to, you know, I do have to give you credit for this. Gail had a really neat infographic that showed an airplane. Remember when we used to travel on airplanes? And how many people had gastrointestinal disorder, and then all these people beside you. So somehow it's not just rare as Main Street, it has to be rare as your neighbor, rare as your nephew or niece. So it has to be really more personal than that. And then, did you know? You know what I mean? So we have to really make it real. And actually, gosh, Maureen, it's great to see you. Like you're the front cover of the rare disease strategy with your arms out on a mountain. Now you're in your kitchen. What do you think? What's your input here?
Yeah, well, I appreciate everything that Kathy said, and I wanted to talk a little bit about what Peter said about it's a good time to talk about healthcare, because what the pandemic has brought to a forefront. One of the things that the pandemic has brought to a forefront is equity, diversion, and inclusion. And so we've been talking a lot about that with the vaccine rollout, with everything. And so I know internationally we've used Leave No One Behind quite successfully. And I think we could be using that for Canada too. If we're really serious about equity, diversion, and inclusion, I would say that rare disease patients are an equity seeking group. And it's great to say it's mainstream. It may be mainstream, but it's not. because we're not getting those services and access to what we should be getting. I personally am going to push for the rare disease strategy, because I think the drug strategy can sit in that rare disease strategy, and it is inclusive because it includes every single person and family member who has a rare disease. So community services, supports. It's not just about access to drugs. We have to remember that a lot of us don't have drugs. So I'm hoping that that's gonna resonate with the politicians. It's and what Kathy said about us being emotional, she's right. We do get accused of that. How can I not be emotional when every country in the industrialized world has a rare disease strategy and we don't? Like after all these years. So I think that's fine to call that out. And I really think that 5-pillar strategy is really the only way that we're ever going to advance. So that's what I'm going to push for with the politicians who I speak to, and I think it'll be very powerful coming from a patient, because and that way we're speaking for all rare disease patients also. And I'm going to push that EDI, equity, diversion, and inclusion. If they're really serious about that, then they need to include rare disease patients. I'll stop there. And of course, if your picture's on the front of the thing, you kind of have to push for it, right?
Exactly.
Because it's getting pretty old. Like I'm unrecognizable from there. So it's got to go through before, you know, who is that young woman there?
Hey, come on. You will always be our poster child, Maureen. So no problems on that. Can I pivot, Bill, back to Kathy for a second? Because, you know, Kathy, you really broke a lot of ground in terms of advocating for clinical trials and access to, you know, a drug for tuberous sclerosis. And again, I mean, what are you thinking now when we look at, you know, we're working right now with neurofibromatosis, you know, a similar kind of disorder, not exactly a cancer, has drugs that are going to be used as a sort of a repurposed drugs. And honest to God, I look up and I say, we're doing the same damn thing that we did when TSC was coming in. I mean, how many years ago was that? What do you think, you know, what can we learn from what your experience is? And what do we need to build into, you know, this new rare drug strategy that we don't have every single disease, I mean, coming up, and I keep calling it a hand-to-hand combat. You know, every single time a drug comes up, we go out and I mean, Peter knows that, we sort of do that same fight over and over again.
It is the same fight. And using a repurposed drug for a new disease, why do you have to start from scratch? Like you said, tumor caused by cancer or a tumor caused by TSC, what's the difference if the same drug can treat them, but it's approved for one and not the other? And I would say that we haven't made a lot of inroads on that at all, because that drug, which is a 40-year-old drug, is only available in 2 or 3 provinces under very special circumstances. For why is that? If you live in BC, you have to move back to Ontario. I had a patient call me not too long ago. What is that? And in terms of political, I think, just to speak from an Alberta perspective, I think Fred will probably have knowledge of that. We're pretty blue still. Our province is blue on the map. So we feel like we don't have a say at all. So the Western provinces are starting to feel like it doesn't matter. Elections are won before our polls even close. So when we talk to our MPs, they have no sway, or, you know, they're the opposition, but rarely are they even in the more visible places of the opposition. So I think there's a real feeling of impotency. And when you find out that this drug that is being charged so much more for this one disease than it is for this other disease, and the research is helping cancer and knowledge around cancer so much, why are we still sitting back here and being in silos? I don't understand.
I don't know, Fred, if you want to weigh in on that, in terms of, you know, you mentioned the opposition. You were in a provincial government. One thing I thought about was the provinces have a lot of standing too. I'll make a note to folks too. There's the Council of the Federation, the Premier's Council meeting that's coming up in October. Manitoba is taking over the chair of that organization, and they actually push the federal government on health transfers, on health policy, and other things too. So that's one other way that a blue province can have a lot of impact. But I don't know, Fred, if you want to jump in on anything that Kathy brought up.
Well, just briefly, it's an excellent point, Kathy. And, it's the reality of healthcare and a number of other policy areas, but healthcare in particular, is that nothing can really be implemented of substance, nothing that reaches the patient and the community without the cooperation of the provinces. So, we often see federal parties trying to put forward healthcare as a major part of their platform, but talking, for example, in Alberta, talking to conservative MP or candidate for the Conservatives about the need to really push and work closely as a unified caucus with the provincial Conservative members is a really good strategy. And that is one way when you're in opposition federally that, depending on the issue, but that is one way quite often that you can have influence is by looking to the provincial jurisdiction. So yeah, I wouldn't discount that as part of the strategy at all. On the whole question of alienation, Western alienation and that sentiment, if someone wants to introduce that topic to you at the door in one of the Western provinces, take the opportunity to connect a feeling of alienation around healthcare and this issue in particular, and tell that person that, look, we expect there to be enough funding for healthcare. That's a given. I'm not interested. If you can get more money for the Canada Health Transfer, that's great. But I'm really interested in how that money is spent. This is not an issue off to the side, a peripheral issue. It affects everyone. We need your action, whether you're sitting in government or not. We need your action, and one way to do it is to go to your provincial counterparts.
Just a question on that, if I might, Bill, and I guess it's a question to you on this one. So thinking about the provincial counterparts, like what role is the Bloc going to play in this?
Well, it's funny, when we talked earlier about the PMPRB issue, the Bloc was instrumental in getting that issue brought forward to the Health Committee of the House of Commons. They've come a long way on that issue and on life sciences, and that province in particular has actually weighed in at the Quebec Court of Appeal to challenge the PMPRB. So there's almost a direct connection there with what the Bloc can do federally when Parliament is sitting. So yeah, I think the Bloc is it's a much bigger party in terms of number of seats than the NDP even. So we can't ignore it. Even if you might want to take off your Canada flag pin on the lapel if you're going in and talking to the Bloc. My experience with them directly has been very productive, thoughtful, and respectful. And they've sort of evolved like the Greens. The Green Party used to just be about the environment. Now they've got a much broader platform and interest. So yeah, that's where, I don't know, Maureen, have you been in meeting with Blocs as sort of the francophonie of the rare disease community?
Yeah, we did. They were pretty receptive. I wonder if anyone on the webinar knows what's happening to the rare disease strategy that the Quebec government was working on. If that just I haven't heard anything recently, so I don't know if the pandemic just put a halt to all that. But they and Ontario are the two provinces that showed interest in the rare strategy, and Ontario had started working on it, but then the government changed, and then Quebec definitely passed that they were going to have it. So, talking to those people, there was interest. So
we'll come back to it. The sad news, I think, in Quebec is that with a change in health ministers and kind of direction, that kind of got put on the side burner, the same as it happened in Ontario. Suddenly we had a change. We're almost out of time, but before we go, I really want to pivot over to Alex for a second. Alex, this will be a surprise because I didn't prep you for this, but we've been talking about this rare drug strategy, the rare disease strategy. Yesterday there was a big announcement that came out that said Alberta, Manitoba, and Quebec are actually going to be implementing what Ontario did a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, and that is a pilot project for newborn screening for children with SMA, which is of course very big news. And I think what was missed in that announcement, was the fact that the way this is happening is that it's a pilot project, with Muscular Dystrophy Canada and a grant going over to each one of these provinces, but quite frankly, call it for what it is. It was originally funded with support from, I think, Biogen, and then it's now been funded as a pilot project with huge support from Novartis. And I don't say that as a negative, but I think we need to embrace it the same as we talked about COVID, these public-private partnerships that will help us move this strategy forward incrementally. And I go back to what I said before, we do not need to have everything in a rare disease strategy implemented tomorrow. It's not going to happen anyway, but we can do implementation on a piece-by-piece basis, right? We've seen what Genome Canada did with genome sequencing. We've seen what, it's been happening in the research and development space. But Alex, maybe you can just give us a little bit of you don't have to give us a big insight, but your sense in terms of the willingness of companies to do these public-private partnerships, and whether or not, certainly something like this is a bit of a blueprint for how we can move forward together.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Durhan, and I do think there's this desire to have more of these public-private partnerships and more of a desire to, even for the pharmaceutical companies, to build more trust. And I think that's something that's actually quite lacking in Canada right now, is that trust between the pharmaceutical industry and the public sector. And if I can just point to another announcement that came out of the UK this week, is now they've got, and what are they calling it? The Innovative Medicines Fund. So they're actually modeling the Cancer Drug Fund. And what I really like about that, and what I would love to see in Canada, is that the UK has learned from how they implemented the Cancer Drug Fund, and they're moving on and looking at a bigger group. I would love to see Canada, just try something, and again, know that they may not get it perfect out of the gate. Be willing to change. Be willing to evolve and adapt. But again, until we can actually get to a point where we can actually test something, it's just it continues to be conversations. And I think it's already been mentioned. It's time just to act and try something, and maybe it won't work, but at least it'll give us experience, and we can evolve.
So it's a perfect segue back to where we started, maybe almost, Peter. You are one of the architects, along with me as an unwilling participant. No, I'm kidding. For one of the very first major rare disease public-private partnerships that we did. And we've often talked about the fact that, good gosh, why can't we go back and look at what we learned from Fabry's? What are you learning from it? And when you think about what you're doing with Beijing now, are those models that you would like to think about? How can we bring these therapies together with a risk-sharing agreement, with public-private partnerships, with the ability to bring them in and collect data? Way back now to, gosh, more than, I don't know how many years ago now, 15 years ago, in terms of the success there. What did we learn?
It's a good question. What did we learn? And I think Alex is right. I think companies are interested in working with governments, country, and the reason Beijing's here, because, the company tagline on that one, cancer has no borders, neither do we. And so Beijing is on a mission to bring its therapies to any country, any location. But the challenge isn't with the companies. Like, at the end, we're interested to play. We're interested to help the Canadians that are out here. The question is, does Canada want the companies? Does Canada want these treatments and therapies here? Because if they don't, if they're going to do these PMPRB capricious decision makings, it's going to be untenable, and companies will go on. Research and innovation will go on, and the US will benefit, and UK will benefit, and every nation in the world will benefit. If Canada doesn't want it, well, that's really on Canada. But if Canada wants it, every company will be there, 100%.
So we're really over.
I have to jump off on this one.
I know,
sorry.
and it is overtime, so we don't like to just lose people. So we will make a commitment to bringing forth a toolkit for our advocacy going forward. Next week should be even more exciting in terms of the discussions that we can have. I really appreciate, everybody's participation here. But I think the important thing, as we say, is that we need to think about, where do we? It's Peter's and Fred's thing. What's the one big ask? To me, the one big ask is, how can we do this in partnership? Our competition is not one drug against the other. Our competition is not one disease against the other. It's not cancer versus rare diseases. It's going to be Canada versus the UK. It's going to be Canada versus the rest of the world. Do we want to be there? And I think if we, Alex's good comment, can we take a page out of what the UK is doing and talking about? innovative therapies and talking about breakthrough therapies. How do we get companies to want to invest in Canada? We're going to get a lot more out of investments in Canada than trying to beat down the price of a single drug, which seems to be our strategy. How do we get more here in Canada? Well, we'll beat up on the price of a drug, as opposed to how do we invite investment? How do we make sure this is a fertile ground for companies to want to come? So stay tuned. Bill, I'll let you close it off in terms of next steps.
Well, so that's it for this webinar. Just a plug for next Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern. We're going to do another roundtable moderated discussion. We've invited MPs from each of the main federal parties, and I think that'll give us an opportunity to hear from them on how their parties are positioning around rare and access to medicines and access to healthcare. Just back to Maureen's point, and the rare disease strategy, let's hear from them and get ready again to get the chat going. And we'll see most of you again next week. And thanks for taking a break this summer. It's great to see many of you, and the panelists really appreciate your input, experience, and thoughtfulness. Don't think that this is the end of it, because Durhan, she's not going to let you get away with just this one webinar. This is going to be on. This is what I don't know what's happening next, but you're there, right?
Well, next week it's not just going to be sand and beach chairs. We're going to provide drinks.
Good.
Summer daiquiris for everybody.
Thanks. Yeah, well, yeah, Angela, thank you so much for all the work to get this together in the middle of summer. This is I know you're there behind the Cord logo. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks a lot.